Vorak stepped off the transport shuttle, his dark green skin shimmering slightly in the artificial lights of the human colony ship Odyssey, his eyes narrowing as he looked around at the clean white walls and hum of machinery. There was nothing special about this place. It looked like any other human vessel, small, crude in comparison to the Drexian warships he commanded, yet here he was the Admiral of the Drexian fleet, sent to oversee the humans' advancements and exchange of technology. With little expectation it would amount to much. He had seen humans before, weak, simple creatures who barely knew their place in the cosmos. It was laughable that such a species even considered themselves a threat to any of the galaxy's established powers. The only reason the Drexians hadn't yet conquered them was because they weren't worth the effort. He had never been impressed by anything humans had shown him. But today was different. He had heard whispers of their new simulator technology, said to be a breakthrough in military training, and Vorak was curious, though he didn't expect to find anything remarkable. The human commander, Captain Anson, greeted him with a polite but firm handshake, introducing him to the crew and guiding him through the ship's corridors. There were a few engineers and technicians hustling by, but none of them seemed particularly remarkable. Vorak felt a strange sense of impatience as he walked down the sleek metal hallways. It was all so pedestrian. But eventually they reached a small door labeled Simulator Room. Anson gestured for him to enter with a slight smile on his face. "This is our latest project, Admiral," he said, his tone full of pride, as he pushed the door open. The Starship Simulator. Inside the room sat a large console covered in glowing panels and touchscreens. The walls were lined with holographic projectors that would bring the training environment to life. At first glance, it seemed like a simple training tool, nothing that could compete with the mighty Drexian warships. But Anson's excitement was palpable. "We believe it will be an invaluable tool for training our fleet," Vorak nodded, his eyes scanning the room before landing on the child sitting at the simulator's central console, a small human boy no older than 8 or 9. His hair was messy, and his eyes wide with intensity as he manipulated the interface. "And this is your chosen operator," Vorak said, raising an eyebrow, his voice dripping with skepticism. Anson chuckled. "Oh yes, this is Liam, one of our best young minds. He's actually been practicing on this simulator for months now. He's extremely talented." Vorak barely stifled a laugh. "Talented? You've put a child in charge of your military technology?" He couldn't help but question, but Anson simply smiled and nodded. "You'd be surprised, Admiral. Liam here is capable of more than you think." With a wave of Anson's hand, the simulator powered on, and the entire room flickered to life. The child, Liam, didn't hesitate. His hands moved with purpose across the console, and before Vorak could comment on it, the starfield surrounding them shifted as the simulation began. Enemy ships appeared on screen. Liam's small fingers moved quickly as he skillfully dodged incoming fire. The Drexian Admiral stood there staring for a moment, his skepticism growing into quiet intrigue. As he watched the boy's quick reactions, his heart rate steady and focused. Every movement was deliberate, as if the child knew exactly what to do next. But Vorak still couldn't believe it. Surely this was a fluke. Surely this child couldn't be so skilled. There was no way humans could possess such precision at this age. No way a child had such control over a simulation meant for adults. The simulation continued, and the intensity increased. Vorak crossed his arms, still skeptical, but something began to stir within him. Liam wasn't just reacting to the simulation. He was anticipating it. The enemy ships changed course to trap him, and the child didn't flinch. He adjusted his tactics without hesitation, pulling the starship into a sharp turn, avoiding a barrage of plasma fire that would have obliterated any other pilot. The Drexian Admiral's eyes narrowed as he watched the child's small hands move with speed and precision, the starship's movements fluid as if the child had years of experience in combat training. Liam didn't just dodge, he outmaneuvered the attacking ships, setting traps of his own. He had turned the simulation into a chess game, with each move calculated and daring. At once Vorak began to feel something he hadn't anticipated: confusion. It wasn't possible. The human species wasn't supposed to have such skill, such control. How was this child so advanced? Had they truly been hiding their potential? Or was it something deeper? Was this child truly a prodigy? Or was there something more to human nature that even the Drexians hadn't predicted? Vorak's hand tightened on the edge of his armrest, his mind racing as the child continued to outwit his enemies with terrifying ease. Liam's movements never slowed. He adapted faster than Vorak could track. The simulation seemed to bend to the child's will. Enemy fire missed by inches, and when it seemed that Liam was cornered, the child used the environment to his advantage, guiding the ship through a field of floating debris and asteroid fragments. Each obstacle turned into a tool as the child's starship sailed between them and launched a well-placed counterattack at the enemy fleet. Vorak's heart beat faster for the first time in his life. He wondered if the human species had something he couldn't grasp, something that defied the logic of warfare, something he had never encountered before. The enemy ships seemed to become desperate, firing at random, hoping to land a blow. But Liam was always one step ahead. The simulation played out in real time, with each decision Liam made changing the outcome of the battle. When the last enemy ship was finally destroyed, the simulator paused. The room fell into a thick silence. Vorak stood frozen, his gaze fixed on the child, who now sat back in his chair, a slight smile on his face, as if he had just completed a simple task. Liam looked up at the Admiral and tilted his head. "Is that all?" he asked, his voice light, but filled with an undeniable confidence. Vorak blinked for a moment, taken aback by the child's calm demeanor. How could someone so young be so poised? How could a human child have the mental fortitude to outsmart an entire fleet of enemies in mere minutes? It was supposed to be a game, yet Liam had treated it like a war zone with deadly precision. The Drexian Admiral glanced at the human officers in the room. None of them seemed surprised. They all looked as though this was just another day at the office. It wasn't just Liam who was exceptional. It was the human species itself. Their capacity for growth, adaptability, and resourcefulness was unlike anything Vorak had expected. A chill ran down his spine as he began to wonder if his initial assumptions had been catastrophically wrong about these humans. Their future might not be as predictable as he thought. The simulation flickered and changed once more, adjusting to new parameters that Vorak didn't fully understand. He watched as Liam's fingers flew across the control panel, his small hands moving with an effortless speed that seemed almost otherworldly. The stakes had just been raised. No longer were they facing near enemy ships. Now the child was up against a full-scale invasion fleet, a force that had been designed to overwhelm and annihilate any human ship in minutes. This was no longer a game. It was a test, and Vorak had no doubt the outcome would be decisive. Liam didn't hesitate. The enemy ships appeared on the simulation's screen, massive and imposing, their weapons charged and ready to fire. For a moment, the room held its breath. The odds were stacked against the child in every way imaginable, and yet the small boy remained completely unfazed. His eyes narrowed with concentration as he surveyed the situation, his focus intense despite the growing danger. Vorak couldn't help but marvel at the calmness with which Liam approached the challenge. Without any hesitation, the child piloted the ship straight toward the heart of the enemy fleet, directly into the firestorm of laser blasts and explosive missiles. Vorak's eyes widened in disbelief. There was no caution, no retreat, no hesitation. Every movement Liam made was deliberate, a response to every incoming attack before it even happened. He didn't merely dodge the attacks. He used them to his advantage, weaving the ship through the chaos as though he had been doing it for years. Enemy missiles launched from all sides, and Vorak thought for sure it was over. But just as the explosion of fire and smoke seemed inevitable, Liam performed a series of complicated evasive maneuvers that allowed him to slip through the firestorm with barely a scratch. The Drexian Admiral's chest tightened. What kind of child could possess such quick reflexes, such precision, and such instinctive mastery over a situation so dire? Liam was no longer simply reacting. He was anticipating the enemy's every move. He guided the ship into a perfect formation, using enemy fire to his advantage by drawing the enemy ships into each other's line of fire, forcing them to destroy their own allies. It was a tactic Vorak had seen only in the minds of the most seasoned war commanders, not a child. As the simulation intensified, The enemy fleet adapted, regrouping and forming defensive formations to counter Liam's strategies. It was clear that this was no ordinary simulator. It had the ability to evolve in response to its user, making the challenge more difficult with each passing second. Yet once again, Liam's brilliance shone through. The young boy utilized every piece of debris, every asteroid, and every piece of wreckage to his advantage, crafting a battlefield out of the most chaotic elements. With each new obstacle, Liam adapted, learning and growing more dangerous with each second. The enemy fleet was starting to break apart. One by one, the ships fell, their destruction more methodical than random. And yet Liam showed no signs of slowing down. His confidence, his presence, only grew as the challenge escalated. It was as though he was not merely playing a simulation, but commanding a real fleet in the heart of an actual war. Vorak stood motionless, a sinking feeling spreading in his chest. There was no way a human child should be able to do this. This wasn't just skill. This wasn't luck. This was something else, something that defied explanation. He could no longer deny it. Whatever this child was capable of, it was beyond anything he had ever seen before. The humans were capable of far more than he had given them credit for, and he had just witnessed their true potential. The child's final maneuver, a daring maneuver that led to the destruction of the remaining enemy ships, left Vorak speechless. The simulator flickered one last time, and the room fell into silence. Liam slowly pulled his hands away from the controls, his expression calm as if he had simply finished an easy task. He looked up at Vorak with a knowing smile. "Did I win?" he asked innocently, as though defeating an entire fleet of hostile ships was nothing more than a casual game. Vorak didn't respond immediately, his mind racing as he tried to process what he had just witnessed. The child had outperformed the best soldiers and pilots in the galaxy. The implications of what he had just seen were too great to fully comprehend. For the first time, Vorak began to realize just how much of a threat humanity posed. It wasn't their weaponry, their technology, or even their fleets that made them dangerous. It was their ability to adapt, to think beyond the boundaries of what should be possible. It was their ability to learn and conquer without limits. And it wasn't just Liam. It was humanity. And that realization shook him to his core. Vorak remained silent for what felt like an eternity. His eyes stayed fixed on the child, Liam, who was now casually stretching in his chair, seemingly unaware of the storm of thoughts raging in the Admiral's mind. The simulation had ended, but the war had only just begun, for Vorak, at least. How could he have been so wrong about these humans? He had expected an easy exchange of technologies, a fleeting demonstration of something that would be forgotten within days, but what he had witnessed was nothing short of a revelation. Vorak turned toward the human officers in the room, his gaze sharp, searching for an explanation. He needed to know more. Was this just a fluke? He couldn't believe that one child could possess such skill, such ability. No, there had to be more to this. It couldn't simply be the boy. It had to be something inherent in humans themselves, a quality that set them apart from any species he had ever encountered. The human commander, Captain Anson, watched him carefully, no trace of arrogance in his demeanor, only an expectation that Vorak would come to the same conclusion that every human in the room had already reached. "Admiral," Anson began slowly, his voice steady, "Liam isn't the only one. We've seen this kind of adaptability in all of our recruits." Vorak's brow furrowed, his disbelief still evident. "What do you mean?" he demanded. "A child like this, outsmarting an entire fleet in a simulation. How is that possible?" Anson glanced at Liam, who was now fiddling with a console panel, his attention clearly no longer on the adults. The captain looked back at Vorak with an expression that was almost apologetic. "It's not just Liam, Admiral. It's every human. We're not just using these simulators for training. We're using them to understand how our minds work, to push the limits of what we can do. The simulators evolve with every user. They learn how we think and adapt in real time. And humans, we learn faster than any species we've encountered. Vorak stared at him, still trying to process the revelation. Adapt in real time. Could it be true? It sounded impossible. Humans weren't supposed to be like this. Too unpredictable, too volatile. The Drexians had always prided themselves on their advanced intellect and their tactical superiority. And yet here was a species whose very nature was to adapt, to outthink everything they encountered. Anson continued, "What you saw wasn't just an isolated case. Every human who has used the simulator has shown this level of strategic thinking. Our brains are designed to learn, to adapt, and to solve problems we've never faced before. That's why we built this, because we believe it's not just the technology that makes us strong, but the way we approach problems. We think differently than any other species in the galaxy." Vorak clenched his fists, his chest tightening as he considered the implications. The way we think. He realized that this was the key. This was what made humans dangerous, and it wasn't something any weapon could stop. The Drexian fleets were formidable, yes, but they had a single weakness that no one had considered. They could be outsmarted. The Admiral turned back to Liam, still sitting calmly at the console, his eyes bright and alert, as if he had just played a game rather than led a fleet to defeat. The boy looked up again, his expression now curious. "Did I do okay, Admiral?" he asked, his voice light and innocent, as if the weight of the universe didn't rest on what he had just achieved. Vorak nodded slowly, a rare feeling of unease settling in his chest. "You did more than okay, young one," he muttered, his voice lower than before. He didn't know how to feel about this sudden shift in perspective. The humans were no longer a curiosity. They were a threat, a force that could not be ignored. And it wasn't just Liam. It was every human who had the ability to adapt like this. For the first time in his life, Vorak felt something he had never experienced before. Fear. It wasn't the kind of fear that came from a weapon or a battle. It was a deep, gnawing realization that no matter how advanced the Drexians were, they couldn't predict what the humans would do next. And that was the most dangerous thing of all. The room was still, the weight of the moment pressing down on Vorak as he made one final decision. "You've earned my respect, human commander," he said quietly, his voice almost reluctant. "But this changes everything. I'm afraid we may have underestimated your species." The silence in the room hung heavy, almost suffocating, as Vorak stood there, processing the implications of his words. For the first time, the Admiral felt the sharp sting of uncertainty. He had seen many species in his time, each with their strengths and weaknesses, but humanity was unlike anything he had ever encountered. It wasn't just their technology that set them apart. It was their ability to adapt, to think on their feet, to evolve with each challenge they faced. The Drexians had always prided themselves on their strategic superiority, but now, for the first time, Vorak questioned whether their tactics would be enough to defeat a species like this. Captain Anson seemed to sense the change in the atmosphere. He stood straighter, his gaze locked on the Drexian Admiral. There was no smugness in his expression, no arrogance, just a quiet, knowing confidence. "Admiral," Anson said, his voice steady and unshaken, "you've seen what we're capable of. We don't back down from a challenge, and we never stop learning." Vorak turned to look at the captain, his eyes narrowing. He had expected to feel anger, to lash out at this revelation, but instead, a strange sense of admiration stirred within him. These humans, they were not the fragile, weak creatures he had once thought them to be. They were a force in their own right, one that could change the course of any battle, any war, with nothing more than their minds. As if on cue, Liam looked up from his console again, his eyes wide with curiosity. "So, we're not going to fight, right?" he asked, his voice soft and unsure for the first time. Vorak's gaze flickered to the child, the question so innocent yet filled with weight. The child had already displayed the strategic brilliance of an experienced commander, and yet here he was, questioning the very nature of war. Was that the true strength of humanity? Their refusal to settle for conflict, their instinct to solve problems in ways other species could not fathom. The Admiral shook his head slowly. "No, Liam," he replied, his voice quiet but firm. "You've proven yourself far more than any of us expected. You've shown us what humanity is truly capable of. But understand this, it's not just the technology or the simulation that makes you powerful. It's the mind. It's the way your species thinks, the way you approach problems. You don't think like anyone else." The room seemed to hold its breath as Liam processed the Admiral's words, his face lighting up with an almost puzzled smile. "So you think we're good?" he asked, clearly unsure of how to interpret the praise. Vorak couldn't help but smile slightly at the child's innocence, a stark contrast to the weight of the situation. "Good," Vorak repeated. "No, you're something far more dangerous than good. You're unpredictable. That's what makes you so dangerous. And I've never encountered a species like you before." The words hung in the air like a warning, a declaration of both respect and caution. The Drexian Admiral finally understood the true nature of the humans. It wasn't just about defeating their enemies or conquering planets. It was about their ability to evolve and change with every situation. A species that could think on multiple levels, that could adapt so quickly to their surroundings, was not one to be underestimated. The Drexians had prided themselves on their strength and intellect, but they had failed to recognize what made humans truly formidable. Anson stepped forward, breaking the silence. "Admiral," he said, his tone shifting to something more serious, "we've been preparing for more than just a demonstration. We've been preparing for the future. And that future, I believe, lies with humanity. Our minds, our adaptability. It's how we'll survive. It's how we'll fight." Vorak's eyes flickered to Anson, the captain's words sinking in. For a moment, the Admiral felt the weight of the galaxy pressing down on him. Humanity was no longer a species to be overlooked, no longer something to be dismissed. They were not just players in the grand game of war. They were a force that could shape the galaxy itself. And for the first time, Vorak wondered if the Drexians were the ones who were in danger. Vorak stood in the midst of this human vessel, his mind racing, his thoughts tangled with the enormity of what he had just witnessed. The room seemed quieter now, the hum of the ship's engines fading into the background as the implications of humanity's potential settled like a heavy weight in his chest. The Drexian Admiral had always prided himself on his ability to read the battlefield, to understand the minds of his enemies. But this was different. Humanity was not what he had thought them to be. They were more than a curiosity. They were an enigma, a puzzle he could not yet solve. Anson's words lingered in his mind. "We've been preparing for the future. Our minds, our adaptability. It's how we'll survive. It's how we'll fight." The future. It was the one thing Vorak had not anticipated. He had assumed that the Drexian fleet, with its unmatched firepower and tactical superiority, would be enough to maintain control of the galaxy. Yet here he stood, in the presence of a species that didn't fight with brute strength, but with ingenuity, with intelligence, with adaptability. It was a different kind of weapon, one that could not be countered by mere might. "Admiral." Captain Anson spoke again, his voice steady but with a hint of urgency. "We've already begun to reach out to our allies. Humanity's potential is not just here, it's everywhere. We're building a network, a coalition, and we believe that together we can change the way the galaxy operates." Vorak turned slowly to face the captain, his gaze piercing. "And what exactly do you propose, Captain?" "That humanity, in its so-called infinite adaptability, could unify the galaxy against established powers like the Drexians. That you could challenge us and win." Anson's expression did not falter. "We're not looking to challenge you, Admiral. We're looking to prevent more wars. The galaxy doesn't have to be divided into constant conflict. We believe that if humanity can lead by example, others will follow. Together, we could reshape this galaxy into something better." Vorak snorted, a sharp sound that broke the tension in the room. You truly believe that? That humans, a species with only a fraction of the history and power of the Drexians, could unite the galaxy? You're naive, Captain. You think that everyone will simply fall in line, just because you think it's the right way. You have no idea what it takes to control the galaxy. Anson's face softened, his eyes filled with a quiet confidence that only fueled Vorak's growing unease. I don't expect everyone to fall in line, Admiral, but I know that humans are capable of inspiring others. We may not have the same resources or the same centuries of power that the Drexians do, but we have something else. We have the ability to learn, to change, to create solutions where others only see obstacles. Vorak turned away from the captain, pacing the length of the room, the weight of Anson's words pressing down on him. Could it really be true? Were humans truly capable of uniting the galaxy, of rewriting the rules of the universe? For a species so young, so unpredictable, they had demonstrated a staggering capacity to adapt, to innovate, to think differently. You underestimate us, Admiral, Anson continued, his voice calm but firm. But that's what makes us dangerous. You think you know how we think, but you're wrong. Humanity doesn't operate on the same rules as other species. We don't fight like you. We don't think like you. And that's why we'll succeed where others have failed. Vorak turned back to face Anson, his expression hardening. The doubt, the uncertainty still clung to him, but there was something else, something deeper, a grudging respect, perhaps even fear. Humanity had proven its worth in a way no other species had. And if what Anson said was true, if they were already building alliances, preparing for the future, then the Drexians were at a crossroads. For the first time, Vorak questioned whether the Drexians' domination of the galaxy was inevitable. He had always believed that it was, but now he wasn't so sure. The rules of war had changed, and the humans had rewritten them in a way that made everything he knew seem obsolete. I'll be watching, Captain, Vorak finally said, his voice quieter now, more contemplative. I'll be watching very closely. Anson nodded, the weight of the moment not lost on him. We're ready, Admiral. We're ready for whatever comes next. Vorak didn't respond, but as he left the simulator room and walked back down the sterile halls of the Odyssey, he couldn't shake the feeling that humanity was no longer just a species on the rise. They were a force that could reshape the galaxy itself, and that, more than anything, was what terrified him. The days following the simulation were a blur of strategic meetings, diplomatic discussions, and internal reports flooding Vorak's private quarters aboard his flagship. Yet, despite the whirlwind of activity, the image of Liam's calm confidence never left his mind. A child, Vorak thought again, and yet he commanded with the precision of a seasoned general. The Admiral had always been a tactician, a thinker who excelled under pressure, but what he had seen in that simulation wasn't just raw intellect, it was something much deeper, something that disturbed him to his core. He found himself standing in front of a large viewport, staring into the abyss of space, the stars scattered like pinpricks in the velvet black. The vastness of the galaxy had never felt so imposing. He was used to the quiet isolation of deep space, but now it was different. It felt like an enormous stage where humanity was about to play its hand, and the Drexians were no longer the only players. He turned his attention to the communication console behind him, where a holographic display flickered to life. The face of his most trusted advisor, General Kor, appeared before him, his expression serious. Admiral, we've received disturbing reports from our outer sectors, Kor said. There's been a sudden surge in activity, ships moving, alliances forming. Humanity is making moves faster than we anticipated. They've already established several networks with smaller factions. It's as though they're preparing for something bigger. Vorak narrowed his eyes, his hand instinctively resting on the command console as he listened to Kor's words. Bigger? He repeated. What exactly do you mean? Kor's image stiffened, and he leaned forward slightly. I mean the humans aren't just playing defense anymore. They've begun actively seeking alliances with other races, races we've long considered insignificant. And it's not just political. They're offering trade, technology, even weapons. His voice lowered, filled with unease. They're playing a long game, Admiral, and I believe they have a plan we haven't yet grasped. Vorak's mind raced. The Drexians had always been at the top of the food chain, their empire spanning vast stretches of space. They had dominated through sheer force and strategic superiority. But humanity was different. They didn't need years of preparation or a fleet of battleships. They were a species that could think, adapt, and most importantly, inspire others to follow their lead. You said they're offering weapons, Vorak asked, a twinge of disbelief creeping into his voice. Kor nodded. Yes, but it's not just any weapons. There's something about the way they're distributing them. It's almost as though they're preparing for a future conflict, one they believe will involve not just us, but every power in the galaxy. And they've been working in secret. Our spies report that they're conducting tests, creating new technologies that are well beyond anything we've seen. Vorak's gaze hardened. New weapons, new technologies. He had seen enough to know that humanity's true power lay in its adaptability. What could they possibly be planning? And if the rumors were true, what would happen when they finally unleashed whatever they were preparing? We need to act before they become too powerful, Kor continued, his voice urgent. I recommend we strike first, disrupt their alliances, dismantle their networks before they can solidify their position. Vorak hesitated, his mind torn. Striking preemptively had always been the Drexian way, but this felt different. There was no clear enemy to strike at, no single faction to target. Humanity was not a threat like any other they had faced before. To attack now, without understanding their true plans, could be catastrophic. No, Vorak said slowly, his voice quieter. We won't strike blindly. We need to understand what humanity is planning. Their ability to adapt. It's too unpredictable for a straightforward assault. We will watch. We will wait. But we will be ready. Kor looked at him, clearly puzzled. Ready for what? For whatever comes next, Vorak replied, his voice filled with a steely resolve. Humanity is not just playing for today. They're playing for the future, and we need to understand what that future looks like before we make our move. As Vorak ended the communication, he turned once more to the viewport, the dark expanse of space stretching out before him. The Drexians had always believed themselves to be the masters of the galaxy, but now, with humanity rising, that belief was being challenged in a way that no one had anticipated. What will the galaxy look like when humanity's adaptability takes center stage? Vorak wondered. He had no answer, but one thing was certain. Humanity's influence would only grow stronger, and if the Drexians hoped to survive, they would need to adapt as well. For the first time in his life, Vorak realized that the greatest war he would ever face might not be one of ships and weapons. It might be a war of minds, and humanity had already proven they were masters of that battlefield. The weeks that followed were tense, filled with a mixture of quiet observation and strategic maneuvering. Vorak found himself more often in the command center, watching the movements of the human fleets, tracking their diplomatic interactions, and scrutinizing every report that came from their allies. The Drexian Admiral had never been so cautious in his career. He had always prided himself on being decisive, on knowing the next move before his enemies even had a chance to think. But with humanity, the rules of engagement were different. They were unpredictable, their motives unclear. The human strategy was brilliant in its simplicity. They didn't push for dominance, nor did they outright declare war. Instead, they had woven themselves into the fabric of the galaxy's politics, offering their technology, their weapons, and their knowledge to anyone willing to accept. It wasn't an immediate conquest. It was a slow, insidious integration. Each alliance, each deal, was a step forward, building a network that would eventually encircle the galaxy. Humanity wasn't just playing for the short-term gain. They were setting up for something far more complex, far more dangerous. Vorak spent hours reviewing the human technological advancements, the new weapons they had been developing. They weren't the typical weapons of war. No massive starships or world-ending bombs. What humanity had crafted were tools of influence. Devices that could turn the tide of battle not by overwhelming force, but by disrupting the very foundations of their enemy's strategy. Hacking systems, countermeasures, and energy-dispersing technologies that left the Drexians vulnerable in ways they hadn't considered. Each advancement felt like a dagger aimed at the heart of the Drexian military. One day, Vorak received an unexpected visitor in his quarters. Captain Anson appeared, as calm and composed as ever, but this time, there was something different in his expression. He wasn't here for diplomacy or to showcase humanity's latest innovation. This time, he had something else in mind. "Admiral," Anson began, his tone measured, "I know you've been observing our movements. You've seen our alliances grow, our influence spread across the galaxy. But there's something you're still not seeing. Humanity isn't just preparing for a war. We're preparing for peace." Vorak studied the human captain closely, trying to read between the lines. "Peace," he repeated, the word tasting foreign on his tongue. The Drexians had built their empire through conquest, through the harsh reality of domination. Peace was a luxury they didn't fully understand, let alone strive for. "Yes," Anson confirmed, stepping closer. "We're not interested in another cycle of galactic conflict. We've seen what endless war does to civilizations. We've lost too many worlds, too many people, and we've learned something important along the way. Peace doesn't come through subjugation, but through unity. We're offering a new way, a way that doesn't involve domination, but cooperation." Vorak felt a surge of skepticism. "Cooperation," he echoed. "You think the galaxy will just unite under your banner of peace?" Anson's eyes softened. "Not under our banner. Under humanity's banner, yes, but not just humanity. We've been showing others how cooperation can be more powerful than war, how working together can create a better future for everyone, even for species like the Drexians." Vorak felt a chill run through him. Could this be true? Could humanity's vision for the future truly be one of peace? It seemed impossible, considering the history of the galaxy, where war had always been the answer to any dispute. But the more Vorak thought about it, the more he realized that perhaps the humans had a point. The galaxy had been in a cycle of war for millennia. Was it possible that a new path could emerge, one where power wasn't measured by conquest, but by collaboration? "I won't lie to you, Captain," Vorak said, his voice low. "I still believe the Drexians have the strength to win, to impose our will on the galaxy. But," he paused, his gaze steady, "but I also see something in your people that I've never seen before, a drive, an intelligence, a determination that makes me question everything I thought I knew." Anson nodded, as if expecting this. "We don't have to fight, Admiral, but we will protect what we've built. Humanity won't back down from its ideals. If we can show others that peace is possible, that the galaxy can thrive without constant war, then perhaps we can build something that lasts." Vorak looked at the human captain, his mind whirling with the implications. This wasn't just a battle of fleets, of ships and weapons. It was a battle of ideologies, of visions for the future. And as Vorak stared into Anson's unwavering eyes, he couldn't help but wonder if humanity truly had the power to change the galaxy, to end the cycle of war that had plagued it for so long. For the first time in his life, Vorak felt uncertainty, and with it, a question that he couldn't shake. What if peace was possible after all?